Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Predicting Your Success as an Entrepreneur. As startups and entrepreneurs develop their ideas, questions of startup roadblocks and the likelihood of success are likely to arise. Today's webinar can help you understand how your natural behaviors and abilities can determine your strengths, weaknesses, and ways to improve your chances of entrepreneurial success. This webinar is for those who have an idea, are just getting their business started, or have had a business for some time but are looking to better their bottom line. First, let's meet our presenters. Greg Keeson serves as Moore Norman Technology Center's Business Development Center Coordinator. Greg's multinational experience and legal relations background spans over 31 years in executive management and business development. As the manager for Moore Norman's award-winning and nationally certified business incubator, Greg has helped develop several companies from start to finish. Greg has the ability to coach entrepreneurs towards creating, running, and growing successful businesses. Business and management consultant Randall Wohl comes from a family of 6 who are all entrepreneurs. His entrepreneurial journey began in 1979, providing software solutions and consulting for manufacturers and distributors in Oklahoma and surrounding states. Over the course of his career, he has provided business, technical, and human capital consulting services for a multitude of companies, ranging from startups to multi-billion-dollar organizations. Randall's expertise is aligned with coaching entrepreneurs to recognize their behaviors and apply adaptive methods to position themselves for success as a business owner and success for their businesses. Join me in welcoming Randall Wohl and Greg Keeson.
Well, Bonnie, thank you for that fine introduction. This is Greg Keeson. I want to do a bit of an introduction to tell everyone, again, remind them of the services for entrepreneurship that we provide here at the Business Development Center. Talk a little bit about what we do currently, and then spend most of our time today talking about a brand new tool that we have here at the Business Development Center that we want to share with you. We have a tool to provide an objective, quantifiable assessment on your behavioral characteristics to compare you and those characteristics with those same characteristics of successful entrepreneurs to give you an even better idea as to what the probability of success is for you as an entrepreneur. And I might mention that currently this particular tool, which is called ProfileXT, is available on an exclusive basis. Toward the end of the presentation, we'll be going through all the details relative to availability and introduction of that particular item along with what the package looks like. But for now, let me turn my attention to what we do here at the Business Development Center to assist you and to assist the community relative to entrepreneurship. Just again as a reminder for many of you, we are a certified business incubator certified by the Oklahoma Department of Commerce under Oklahoma law. We had the pleasure this last year of being named the Business Incubator of the Year by the U.S. Small Business Administration's Oklahoma District. The Business Incubator part of what we do is to first look for ventures that are unique in terms of their qualifications, that being in the way of a service or product that does not have an active competition in the marketplace locally. Normally that's supported by some type of intellectual property, be it in the way of a patent, etc., but something that is unique, that we can take advantage of that as a segue into development of the product, development of the business, first locally, then hopefully on a state, regional, or national basis. We do have office and industrial space available here. So the segments that we appeal to are not only the blue-collar type businesses such as software development, but we actually have a couple of manufacturing businesses also located here. Our emphasis here in terms of staff is to, first of all, be concentrating on and make the most effective use of your business model and our strengths and people we know to help accelerate your business, to avoid what I would call common startup mistakes, and they are numerous and recurring, and also something that everybody has in common is there normally is an issue in terms of trying to find financing for your business. We consider ourselves to be fairly creative, fairly well connected, and very experienced in terms of finding a way, be it in the form of equity financing or in the form of leverage, to try to help get you started. The advisory services that we have here really are for three different types of businesses, and I want to make sure everybody understands this, because the incubator is certainly one aspect of what we do for the community, but we also service existing business owners. The subject matter that we cover here can be everything from marketing, finance, intellectual property. We have a staff of legal folks who are on our advisory board who assist us with that aspect. Administrative, any type of business situation, business issue that you have, we are prepared to help you address either with existing resources we have or people who we know here in the community. Certainly, if you're an entrepreneur and you have not started your business but have a concept in mind, we can help develop that concept. We can assist you with strategic planning, etc. And then finally, there's a category of people who are inventors, where you've come up with an innovative service, innovative product, normally supported by some type of intellectual property like a patent, where you need issues relative to prototyping, testing, further development of that intellectual property and marketing. We have experience in terms of those particular aspects as well. Now, let me address, before we talk about what I call the main event here, which is the ProfileXT, I want to talk a little bit about issues of attributes that we try to help you assess and evaluate. Part of this, and this is something you still will need to do in addition to ProfileXT, is to understand who you are, understand why you're doing it. And I wanted to list here and go through real briefly, perhaps anecdotally in a couple cases. The definition of entrepreneurship revolves around risk-taking. If indeed your nature as a person, the way you've lived your life, has to be risk-averse, this is a venture that you really need to consider seriously as something that perhaps you should not enter. Because every aspect here relative to your personal life, your finances, your future, you're going to put on the line to be a successful entrepreneur. Background and experience. Generally, success in a particular venture and convincing others of the probability of your success in a particular venture is a function of what you bring to the table. Understand, when you are looking at entrepreneurship, what is your true motivation, and make sure that focus is correct. And let me give you a small anecdotal example that I've run into a lot, where people have a perception of perhaps the boss and the boss's business, and they've been a worker all their lives, and they've got a perception that is not correct in terms of what it takes to be the entrepreneur and to be self-employed. For example, the person says, well, I've seen the boss, and he's spending all of this free time, and I'm doing all the work and making all the money. Well, make sure that you understand the tasks to be done and what entrepreneurship and self-employment really means before you venture there. Because all of those hours that may be perceived as being free time, maybe time relative to marketing, administration, general business development, and all the things that the average worker doesn't see. No matter what other qualities one has, you've got to have the ability to sell. Now, this is selling your product, it's selling yourself. Is once you have entered entrepreneurship, if you were out even networking, the issue is you're constantly selling. Part of this is confidence, part of it is having the plan, part of it's having the right product that's positioned, but you've got to be able to and willing to sell. Health and the ability to handle stress, I think, is quite self-evident. Entrepreneurship is not for people who are weak of heart, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, because there is stress at every particular point, and understand that when you go in. And handling responsibility, each and everything that's done relative to you as the entrepreneur is you must look inwardly, or to your board if you have one, or to your informal board if you formed one, relative to advice and accept responsibility and be able to delegate that out. Dealing with people. This can be internal, external, etc. It's just people skills. Things are still done through people. Even if you have an internet business, the issue of developing that business, developing relationships, etc., is the ability to still position people to get them to do what you want. There needs to be an assessment of your time, your priorities, etc. And I speak a lot to this to the people who I see who are coming in indicating that they want to be entrepreneurs. The amount of time that you may have spent as an employee versus the amount of time you're going to spend in the business as an entrepreneur are very different. Doing all of your own planning, doing many of your own functions, having to represent the company at all different activities, all take time. The time you devote to the day-to-day visible parts of the business may be 8 hours per day, and sometimes involve another 4 hours at night and weekends, etc. So when you assess the issue of becoming an entrepreneur, understand the amount of time you're going to spend on that is going to be substantially more than what you would have spent as an employee, and determine whether indeed your priorities in life will allow you to do that. Persistence. I have a very large sign in my office that I pass around to our tenants here at the Business Development Center with that word on it. Because yes, it takes a good plan. Yes, it takes devotion, and it takes all these other attributes to be able to be successful, understanding your competition, reacting, pricing, the whole thing. But it still takes persistence, because it is not a straight line between beginning and end. There are high points, there are low points. You've got to make sure that the low points don't get you down, and you continue to persist. You must continue to adapt. You must continue to stay on top of market changes. But if indeed you are going to be successful, persistence and devotion to that particular task is very critical. Family support. Many people don't recognize this, but certainly I do as an entrepreneur, that the issue of making a decision to becoming an entrepreneur has sacrifices involved in doing it. Personal basis, financial basis. Hopefully everyone will be rewarded in the long term, but you must have consensus from amongst your support group. If you don't, I can tell you what happens was typical, and I'll be honest, happened to me, is the issue: you come home and you've had a bad week, a bad month, a bad 6 months, and the word at home is, what's happened and how are things going? And if you didn't have support and consensus on the front end, it tends to create more conflict on a personal basis. Conflict on a personal basis creates a distraction from your business, which decreases the probability of success. So that one, in terms of being anecdotal, people hear me talk about that. It's not something that's obvious, but something you certainly need to consider. The issue of fringe benefits, people walk in and want to start businesses, and everybody wants to have all the benefits as if they were still at Johnson Controls or Devon Energy, etc., and that just doesn't happen on the front end. I would say 99% of the cases. So what you got to be aware of is the financial wherewithal to be able to provide all of those things to you and your employees on the front end when you start a business is extremely difficult and extremely expensive. So it's best to plan that you will not be able to do that, and people will have to grow with you in the business. That is just a fact of life. Last couple things I want to talk about will be related to the fact that when you start your entrepreneurship, you better have some kind of rainy day fund, because income does not come flowing in the door in terms of profit generally for some months, and depending on your sales cycle, perhaps a year or more. So you better have money set aside to take care of that. And final item I'll talk about, and this is something that I try to bring out in people. You will know if you have this. If you don't have an absolute passion for what you're doing, the likelihood for success, because you won't be persistent and you won't stay after it, decreases enormously. All right, having talked about those characteristics, let me then get into introducing the real meat of our topic this afternoon, the ProfileXT. The one thing we've talked about is the assessment that I've been doing traditionally, and I think a lot of professionals like myself do, relative to looking at your character, looking at your background, trying to pull all that information together to help the both of us, with me as a practitioner and you as a potential entrepreneur, understand what is the likelihood and what are the problems associated with your becoming an entrepreneur. There is now an ability to quantify those behavioral characteristics and compare them to those of folks who have been successful entrepreneurs. So with that, let me introduce Randall Wohl, and we will walk through with him exactly what this profile is, how it works, and then talk about how we're going to offer it to you.
Greg, thank you very much for your introduction, and also learning a lot about the Business Development Center and the tools and functionality that you provide with the Business Development Center. One thing that's ironic, I've been an entrepreneur for almost 35 years, and I never knew any of this ever existed. So mine came from the School of Hard Knocks. If I had known these things and these tools were available, I definitely would have participated, and it probably would have saved some of the knocks from time to time. But to give you a little background about the assessment, a few years ago, I was on my way to a meeting, and a company called me by the name of Profiles International, and they said, based on my background, and they found me on LinkedIn, is that with my business and management consulting, they had a tool that could help me better understand how to solve people problems and how to get people to be able to perform at a higher level. And so it got my interest, and I talked to them the following weekend, and the tool that we're going to be talking about today, the ProfileXT, is the tool, the assessment that I had to take to be able to determine if I was a high enough percentage match to utilize their products and services and provide those for other companies. So it was very, very key, and I learned a lot about by myself, is that when you're working with people, understanding their behavioral traits, their approach to learning, and their occupational interest better helps you understand how to guide and direct them to do things in a proper way and to be successful at doing it. Profiles International has, they're in 125 countries, they're in 33 languages, and actually one of our newest clients that we're working with came through the technology referral, and it's located in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and it's ASCO Aerospace USA, LLC. Very fortunate that is now one of our clients that we're working with, and very happy to be working with them. But what we're going to talk about with the assessment itself is what we're measuring. We're going to be looking at 20 performance indicators, and those 20 performance indicators are in 3 groups. The first one being, we want to understand that person's approach to learning. Not necessarily how smart you are, but how do you intake data and information to be able to process that in a way to be successful. The other is behavioral traits. And what we're looking at today are core behaviors which drive performance in an organization or in your organization as an entrepreneur. And last but not least, your occupational interest. Well, what really interests you? Are you an enterprising person? Are you entrepreneurial? Are you a person that really likes to do a lot with financial things? So we're going to be looking at your occupational interest as well to see and better understand how to move forward in a positive direction. The assessment itself is taken online. Everything's done over the internet. The information is maintained in the cloud. And basically it takes about 60 minutes to take. And it's one of those situations that it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of information in there. You wonder when you went back to school or if you're going to school today that really applies to what you're going to be doing in the workforce moving forward. The assessment itself is used in many different ways. It's used for placement, promotion, succession planning, which is a very hot topic today. It's used for coaching, developing peak performance models, and job descriptions. And while I'm talking about job descriptions, I work with a lot of companies, and when I do that, one of the first things I ask about, I'd like to see the job descriptions of the people I'm going to be training. And they may ask why, and I say, well, I want to understand not only the functions that this person has to do, but what are the behaviors that are required to get that job done? 99.9% of the time, the job descriptions that I review today say nothing at all about behavioral traits. And they're missing that link as to what drives performance. So it's very, very critical. There's multiple reports that are provided with the tool as far as an individual report to better understand who you are and utilize the report for self-development. Because regardless who we are who we are. And to be able to better understand ourselves and how to approach things in a different manner, then we really need to understand and have the self-awareness of what our behaviors are. There's other reports that are also available with that from a management and behavioral consideration. If you're coming to the Business Development Center, it's a tool for Greg to better understand you, to be able to modify his approach, if need be, based on your behaviors, and it allows you to change by adapting your behavior in a different direction to be able to make it and succeed with positive results. So at this point in time, I guess before I do that, I want to mention 2 more things. One of the things about assessments when you're working with other organizations, many times you're taking what's called a DISC-based assessment. A DISC-based assessment, you describe yourself. What this tool is doing is you're not describing yourself. We are finding out who you really are. And based on that, it helps us better understand the approach that we need to be able to take to make you successful. And one of the things that the assessment is doing is that we do validation studies every 2 years. And the validation studies, we look at that, are we measuring what we're supposed to be measuring, and is it successful in doing that? So that's a very important ingredient moving forward with utilizing assessments. Some of the company names that you may be familiar with that are utilizing our assessment technology: Coca-Cola, Keller Williams, Rosewood Hotels, Sitel, which one of the locations are in Norman. They use it on a worldwide basis. They actually, when they went to begin using the assessment itself, they took over 100,000 PXTs to be able to understand their people and to be able to train them in a fashion to be able to ramp up their performance. Another one is SAP. And last but not least, the one that I mentioned earlier, one of our newer ones, is the ASCO Aerospace USA, a manufacturing aeronautical company in Stillwater, Oklahoma. All right, the next thing that we're going to cover is we're going to talk about the individual report for just a second. When you take the assessment with the individual report, you're better able to understand who you really are and how to utilize it for self-development. And I guess I'll stop here for a second. Greg, you just finished your assessment and you were able to read the dialogue from your individual report. What did you think? How well did that fit with who you really are?
I would tell you, when I finished and took a look at the results here, I find them to be quite fair. We are who we are, but nonetheless, it always is refreshing and necessary for us to address who we are in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And I think you can see, as you take a look, and I inherently know this, in terms of things like energy levels, assertiveness, decisiveness, independence, etc., that those are strong characteristics. And then there are some that I have to be constantly aware of in terms of managing interpersonal relationships. Sometimes I just have a very independent attitude and don't listen well. Sometimes I just decide my way or the highway. So all those things are issues that we all need to address, and I think that certainly in looking at the results here, the results very fairly state exactly who I am. Like it or not like it, that's me.
Greg, thank you for the information about what you thought about your individual report. What we're going to do now is we're going to, as you talked about some of your results, it's a lot easier if you're a visual person to be able to look at the graph of what the results really mean. When the assessment is taken, what happens is that we are utilizing what's called a STEN graph, and a measurement of your skills or your behaviors on a range of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. And how the STEN graph works, if you'll think of it as a standard bell curve, the first 3 numbers are the lower 16%, the middle area, 4 through 7, is 60% of the population, and the latter percent, the additional 16%, 8 through 10, is a higher part of the bell curve for the normal population. When you take the assessment, there is no pass or fail. You are who you are, and I have seen people succeed at all levels within this, but we're going to talk here in a few moments about how it applies to an entrepreneur, and that's why we're here today. So Greg, if we can, let's talk a little bit about your scales and what they really mean.
Okay.
On your learning index is a composite of the following 4 scales: verbal skill, verbal reasoning, numeric ability, and numerical reasoning. And what we're looking at actually is not exactly how smart you are, but it's your approach, your intake of data, of how you learn. And on the first scale, you measure a 7. Now, let me back up one more second, is that when you take the assessment, you are scored. It is a raw score, but the results are displayed and normalized over the population in a standard bell curve. Okay? So from your learning index, your skill is fairly high. And what that means is that you handle fairly complex tasks with relative efficiency. Would you agree with that?
I think yes, that's correct.
Okay. And when you get to your verbal skill and verbal reasoning, in the next two cases, you fit with the majority of the normal population. But what happens is that on your verbal skill, that tells us how you communicate with others, but you enjoy utilizing, a diverse vocabulary. In a lot of cases, entrepreneurs will do that. You've got to have that verbal skill to be able to communicate with your suppliers and customers and other ones in a way, and especially if you're a speaker as an entrepreneur as well. On your verbal reasoning, again, it's pretty much close to the normal population. You're relatively proficient in analyzing and using verbal information. And so from that perspective, you fit pretty closely to the model that we'll be talking about soon. The next two areas, you exceed. The norm is that you're in the higher percentage, the higher 16% in the standard bell curve, which is good. It means that when you're talking with people and you're talking with clients, and if they bring up numbers in the process, is that you can think on your feet. You can process that information very quickly. And you can mentally determine, the mathematical situations to problems, your ability to visualize trends. That's a real key thing in numeric reasoning. When we're working in business today, we have to understand the trends to be able to process it to make sure that we're going in the right direction. So again, the first part is your approach to learning. In this assessment, it carries 40% of the results as to whether you're a match for a specific position. And today it's the entrepreneur. Okay, the next area we're going to talk about are behavioral traits. What we have found over time in all companies, what drives performance in an organization is a person's behavioral traits. And that's the soft skills. Why they always look at how you're being measured and what you do, that's important, because that's how we determine whether those behaviors drive the metrics that you need to be able to perform at a higher level. So let's talk about some of the behavioral traits. Your energy level is very high. It's above whenever it comes to the standard bell curve, and this is a real key to being an entrepreneur, is that it primarily means that you're a self-starter, you're self-motivated. You mentioned some of these things when you talked about them earlier, about the Business Development Center, but it's a very, very key element in being an entrepreneur. Your assertiveness is very high, is that you focus on achievement and competitiveness, and you like to win. You want to do it, and you want to do it right. Do you agree with both of those on the top two?
I absolutely do agree.
Okay. All right, now we get to your social ability. It's a measure of your social presence. What you're going to find in social ability with an entrepreneur, a lot of times they are on the low end of that scale. Okay? And the primary reason for that is they can depend on themselves to get the job done. When you have to start interacting with other people and expecting them to generate the same results that you do, you might as well give that up. But they are who they are. They can be coached to be able to perform at a high enough level. But the other thing about social ability that's real key is that when you're working on projects, is that you don't like the chit-chat. When it comes to getting the job done, it's very, very important that I'm focused. I need to stick with my productivity and move forward in the right way. So in my situation, I'm exactly the same way. My social ability, I love people. I can be sociable, but whenever it's time to get the job done, I do not like the chit-chat at all.
No, those are all important points, but again, not to focus on a particular weakness, but you had asked before if this was indicative of what I'd experienced over time, and it absolutely is. One of the things that I have to be very careful about is I feel very competent to carry on myself. I tend to be impatient with people in terms of accomplishing tasks. I tend to hold people to higher standards, and what it's done is to retard team building in some cases. So if you recognize this, and being successful is part of building a team, you've just got to rein that in, be conscious, and manage to that.
Thank you. The next one is manageability. A lot of times entrepreneurs are on the low end of the scale. And if you listen to what Greg said earlier, he's been an entrepreneur before. He's been in the ditches. He's been able to work through situations in his business life. A lot of times entrepreneurs are very low on the manageability scale because they always defend their point of view. But what's happened in yours is that now you're moving back toward the middle. My guess is at one point you probably were on the other side of that, and that's where I exist. That's my space. Mm-hmm. But now you're working with a structure, with a system in place, and so that manageability, you are moving toward being able to work more with the teams and the coaching and some of those other areas as well. As far as attitude is very important. Whenever you are an entrepreneur or starting your own business, because sometimes, as you mentioned in your slides before, is that it can get very, very difficult being an entrepreneur. There can be some very, very tough times, and in those cases, that attitude needs to be as positive as possible to be able to approach the situations, in a way to, be in a positive mode. And your attitude, if you want to talk about that a little bit, as a 4, how does that relate to, what you're doing today? Is it a situation where it's reserved? Is the attitude reserved until you understand the situation more? Or what would you say about that?
Well, I think that it's evolved again over time. We talked about my experience as an entrepreneur and moving into being more of an academic at this point. It probably has evolved somewhat, the same as manageability, into the fact that I don't manage. I understand and have managed my own businesses now, but I'm more conscious, again, I think of an overview and being perhaps more accommodating than what I might have been. So if I would have taken this test perhaps 10 years ago, there might have been some different results.
Okay. The last 4 scales on the graph, I'm just going to touch on lightly so we can move along and then get to what it really applies to as being an entrepreneur. But the decisiveness, being very high on that scale, is you can move quickly to make decisions. You can think on your feet. Which is very, very critical as being an entrepreneur. The accommodating part, you're generally willing to listen to others' perspectives, but it's reserved. You don't go into a situation with rose-colored glasses and just accommodate whatever anyone says as, yeah, I know, if you say it, then I believe it. Well, sometimes it takes us a little bit to better understand the situation or better understand the position to whether we're being accommodating to the situation. The independence, you're very high on independence. There's usually a direct correlation between independence and manageability. In my situation, my manageability, if you might say, I'm low on the manageability scale and very highly independent. That's a direct correlation. But again, your manageability has moved more, in a sense, toward the center. And last but not least, objective judgment is very, very important to you. You're data-oriented. You need to see the actual information, and it need to be making an objective judgment based on data rather than on the lower end of that scale and it being a subjective decision where you're acting with emotions or you're acting with your guts. But what happens as a risk taker, as an entrepreneur, many cases it needs to be subjective because you've got a window of opportunity. And with that window of opportunity, it may not come along again, in the near future. The last three things that we look at is we want to determine when you take a position, or if you choose to become an entrepreneur, what are the three primary occupational interests that you're looking at. Your results, number one is enterprising. That's the entrepreneurial spirit. So that's right on. Your next one has moved to financial and administrative. I would guess that in the years you were an entrepreneur, if you did not work as much on the financial side as you do today, then this may not even show up. It may be more in creative because you have more time to be creative as an entrepreneur instead of having to deal with the dollars and cents. And what's happened, now you're helping companies from a financial perspective to get the loans, to be able to handle the monetary issues, and now your focus has changed to be able to do that. So the creativity has changed as well. Last but not least is people service. That is a very, very high driving element to become an entrepreneur. You're helping people, you're motivating others, and you're working with others. So I think the enterprising and the people service were right on, but again, the financial administrators has caused because of the situation that you're in today. So at this point in time, now we're going to go to our next slide.
Randall, if I can interrupt for a moment here to reemphasize something. Those percentages that are listed there, whether they be for me or someone else who is going to be taking this assessment, are not a pass-fail. They are not an absolute measure in terms of you will be successful above 80% or below. Yeah, can you reemphasize that again? Because I don't want anybody to be left with the fact that their percentage is low and woe is me and I should give up.
Yeah, the key about entrepreneurship is that be who you are and be successful. I've seen people on all ends be able to be successful. The 80% rule, that if you're an 80% match or higher, then you may be a great entrepreneur, but if you're lower on some of the skills, what it tells you is that to be successful in your business is that you may need to bring on a partner that could fill in the gap on some of the areas that may be where you are a bit weaker, in many cases where you should be, and bring in someone that brings that strength to the table. And both of you can work compatibly together to be able to be successful. But if you're aware of where you stand today and can understand best how to get to where you want to go tomorrow, then the results again are you are who you are, be successful who you are, and I admire a person that wants to become an entrepreneur. But just be prepared if there's areas that you need to strengthen up, that you provide that by bringing in someone else that can help you with that process.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, on the next slide, what we're talking about now is we're putting everything into perspective. We are taking your individual results, and again, on your individual results, we are looking at the total person. At that point, it has nothing to do with what you're going to become, whether it be an entrepreneur, what position you're going to fill in a company. It's who you are. Now we're taking it and we're applying your individual results to a model of an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur. So, and I'm going to go through these steps briefly because I don't want to steal the show. We've got a lot of things, coming that we're going to present to you here in a few moments as an opportunity for you to become involved with our relationship and working with the tools, taking the assessment and utilizing the background of Greg and I both to help you better understand who you are to be more successful. So walking through this, if you look at the highlighted numbers in blue, that's where you fit within the model. So you're a great fit. When you see the areas that are marked in yellow, that means you're outside of the model. But are you outside enough for it to make a major difference? So on the learning index of a 7, again, we talked about this earlier, you're a quick thinker, you can multitask, you can think on your feet. Looking at the other skills that go with your approach to learning, you're a 93% match. So your aptitude to be able to be an entrepreneur, you're a 93% match to be successful. That's very, very key. If you're lower on that index, the business can be more stressful. If your learning index is let's say a 3 or a 4, business can be more successful or stressful for you. And so it may be a little bit more difficult, and where you may want to bring in that partner to be able to help you overcome those situations. In the next area, on behavioral traits, you're a 74% match, which is very high in many cases because behaviors are driven in different ways. But when you look at the energy level, the assertiveness, and a lot of the things that we talked about in the other areas, one area that we talked about in social ability is that being a 3 on the scale, the model says the person needs to be probably a 5 through an 8, which means that if you're going to run a business by yourself, the social ability factor is not important. But when you begin bringing in people or you begin communicating with others in a team format, the social skills, it becomes more important for you to modify your approach to allow others to adapt their behavior and be successful as a team. Some of the other areas as well, accommodating, manageability, others that are outside of the scale, actually the attitude and the accommodating, it's not far enough out to make a major difference. But you need to be self-aware of where you align yourself on that scale. If your attitude is a little bit less positive, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, and this is very important, it needs to be retained in a positive mode, because when the going gets tough, you have to stay positive to be able to be successful. And last but not least, on the last scales, what we have found to be successful as an entrepreneur are 3 key occupational interests. Number 1 is you're enterprising, you're entrepreneurial, which is pretty much a given. If you take the assessment and you find out you're not entrepreneurial, we probably need to talk. The next one is creative. When you're an entrepreneur, you've got to think outside of the box sometimes. You have to be creative. There are windows of opportunities that come up, and you're not always doing things status quo. So it's very key to be creative in your work environment. And last but not least, you need to be a good people person. It's not only with your family, it's not only with your people that maybe could be a partner or employees, but it's your customers, it's your vendors. You have to have that relationship. You have to be a good people person. And in your situation, you match 2 of those, so you're an 85% match in occupational interest, which is great. The financial administrative, again, is because that's who you are. That's what you're doing, and that's how you're helping companies today. So that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to make sure that you understand about the assessment. When Greg has been working with companies, is that he'll look at the business plan, he looks at a lot of different areas, but he's never had the tool to understand the behavior, the DNA of who you really are, and coach to that. Being able to coach to that to get you to be able to work that way works phenomenally well.
Well, Randall, thank you again. And one thing I want to just mention in terms of Randall's background and Randall's involvement here with the Business Development Center is Randall is certainly a valuable resource, and Randall is also a member of our advisory board. So let me then, if I can, move into kind of some closure on this. I had mentioned at the beginning of our presentation today that we're in a position here at the Business Development Center to offer this particular product, and I would kind of reemphasize even before we go into the package. You've heard Randall talk about the assessment, talk about the results of the assessment, and we just did a kind of a debriefing for mine. All that is part of the package we're going to talk about here. We're going to be offering this package, and I'll outline in a second the attributes and all of the different aspects of that package on a special offer, first come, first serve, at $49. If you have interest in taking this assessment, participating in this particular program, my email address is noted there. Please contact me, and as part of this, we also want to offer one free assessment to a person who will be randomly selected. Randall has provided an example of the assessment. This includes your taking of the assessment. It includes a debriefing from Randall with you individually on each of these individual characteristics, and I think that's extremely valuable because this is very personalized in terms of reading the results, understanding the results, having an opportunity to talk with and get some feedback from an expert in terms of what all this means, because this is, again, a meaningful part of all the things that you want to evaluate in terms of making that decision on becoming an entrepreneur. You'll also receive the PXT Entrepreneurial Assessment CD to take home with you for review. And certainly as part of this package, we're going to invite you to and go through with you, additionally here on site, a tour of our Business Development Center. So we certainly hope you'll take advantage of this. I think it's an outstanding offer. It's something, again, that is exclusive here at the Business Development Center. We're available right now for Q&A.